Welcome back in. Today we're going to discuss some of my favorite league winners for 2024. I mean, it's crazy to think that the season starts in about 2.5 weeks. So, drafts are heating up. People are getting ready to draft. So let's go ahead and get right into some players that I think that are going to win you your league in 2024. So first thing, let's start at the quarterback position. And we're going to hit on my guy, Kyler Murray. I think Kyler Murray is just a really easy player to target. Now, if you look at last season, the three top quarterbacks that were on the most teams that won their leagues last year were Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts. All three of those players have something in common, and that is the ability to run the football. And that is something we're seeing more and more of. And that is the type of quarterback you should be targeting. It is a lot harder for a quarterback that's more of a pocket passer like a Joe Burrow to be able to get to that level because they do not offer that. They would have to have a truly like elite type season in terms of passing yards and passing touchdowns. And really the passing touchdowns number is really the most important one, where you're going to need to get 40 plus passing touchdowns to be able to compete with some of these other guys because of their rushing upside. So Kyler Murray definitely checks that box. I mean, last year he ranked 8th among quarterbacks total fantasy points from weeks 10 on, and he was 6th in fantasy points per game over that same span as well. And Kyler Murray's really just been really dependable since 2019. He has fantasy finishes of 11th, 4th, 5th, and 10th. He also ranks 5th in fantasy points per game since entering the league, which only trails Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Dak Prescott. Now, one of the things that really makes me really stand out for him this year is some of the weapons. They invested a top 10 pick in Marvin Harrison. Then they also have Trey McBride, who broke out in a big way. Second-year wide receiver Michael Wilson, and they brought in Zay Jones. They also have James Conner and Trey Benson at running back. So some of the best weapons he's really been surrounded with. I really love what Arizona's coaching staff did last year. I think this is a very smart coaching staff as well. So I just think overall, Kyler Murray's in a great spot. I mean, you're able to get him at QB8, 74th overall, and you don't have to invest some of that heavy draft capital that you do with some of these other guys. I mean, this is a player that definitely has the ability to rush for 500-600 yards as well. So I just love Kyler Murray this year and the discount you're getting on him. I find myself a lot more foregoing drafting early round quarterbacks and going after someone like Kyler Murray. Now, if you're willing to wait a little bit longer, there's another quarterback, and he's actually a rookie, and that's Jayden Daniels coming off the board at QB12, 104th overall. Now, he didn't break out until last season, but what he did, my goodness, he had 50 total touchdowns last year, 10 of those being rushing, really efficient, 72.2% completion percentage, 11.7 yards per attempt. He also delivered the second best EPA per play in ESPN quarterback QBR history last year. He's actually the only FBS player in college football history as well, with 12,000 passing yards and 3,000 rushing yards. So now the weapons aren't great for him with the Commanders. I mean, Terry McLaurin, I do think, is an undervalued asset. Somebody like in the range of like a DJ Moore, somebody like that, where they've always been held back by really poor quarterback play. This is definitely the best quarterback that Terry McLaurin's ever played with. I do think he gets a little bit of a bad rap because of that. But they do still have Jahan Dotson, but remains kind of a shaky option. Hasn't really done a whole lot since being drafted in the first round. But this year, they really invested in the offense with second-round pick tight end Ben Sinnott, and then Luke McCaffrey in the third round. So I do think that their weapons aren't terrible. And, honestly, overall, I just think Jayden Daniels figures to rush for probably 600 plus yards. And that's probably on the low end, honestly, in terms of a projection. I think he could probably get you 5 to 6 rushing touchdowns as well. So Cliff Kingsbury is the new offensive coordinator here after they moved on from Eric Bieniemy. You look at Cliff Kingsbury's offense; they're always fast paced. They were 3 of the 4 years that he was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. His offense is ranked in the top 5 of pace in 3 of those 4 years. So I just think everything kind of aligns this year. And Jayden Daniels, I think, is just a cheaper Anthony Richardson. Everybody's been glazing Anthony Richardson all offseason. What's the difference between Jayden Daniels and Anthony Richardson, besides the fact that Jayden Daniels has actually proven in college that he can actually go out and be a productive quarterback? Like, that's not really what Anthony Richardson came in for. And that does not mean knocking Anthony Richardson. I think Anthony Richardson is perfectly fine at cost. I think he definitely has potential to be a top 5 quarterback this year. I'm just saying Jayden Daniels is a much cheaper value than what Anthony Richardson is. Anthony Richardson is going like the 4th or 5th round, compared to Jayden Daniels, who's going 104th overall. So if you look at the running back position, and this one's a little bit more obvious now, but honestly, Christian McCaffrey was pretty obvious last year, and he was by far the number one guy on the teams that won their league last year that was rostered last year at over 30% of leagues. So I think Bijan Robinson offers very similar upside that he did. RB3, 6th overall. Now, this was a player that was frustrating last year, Arthur Smith last year, that just kind of utilized him as a committee back, and it was super frustrating, because it's just not something you typically see, especially with a team that drafted him in the top 10 and somebody with his type of talent. Like, he is a true, like, generational type talent. He was 16th in 2 yards per carry, 5th in missed tackles force, 7th in evaded tackles, 3rd in target share last year. He was 8th in yards per reception, 21st in yards per route run. Like, it was super frustrating. Tyler Algier and Cordell Pattis were both involved in the offense. Bijan did lead the team in carries with 216, but Tyler Algier was too far behind with 186. But then inside the red zone, it got even more frustrating because Tyler Algier widely led this team in red zone touches with 34 and to 21 for Bijan. So there's obviously a new offensive system here with Zach Robinson coming over from the LA Rams. Then you have Reed Morris taking over as the head coach with this team. And this coaching staff has talked a lot this offseason that they want to use him very similar to Christian McCaffrey. And I believe it. I think he's going to be a player that's going to approach 80+% of the opportunities from this backfield. Tyler Algier will still be involved, but I just think Bijan Robinson is definitely going to be a workhorse back. Phenomenal pass catcher. Runs behind one of the best offensive lines in the league. PFF has them ranked at 6th in terms of offensive lines heading into 2024. So every box is checked here with this team. Kirk Cousins now quarterback, so this offense should be way better than what it was last year. This is saying a whole lot, pretty low bar, but still, Bijan Robinson, the sky is the limit for him this year. So let's move over to Isiah Pacheco, RB11, 25th overall right now. I don't have to say a lot. I have been all over Isiah Pacheco all offseason. Happy that everyone's starting to come aboard. All the other creators here on YouTube are starting to jump on the Isiah Pacheco bandwagon. I've been here all offseason, so happy to have you guys aboard. But this is a player last year who saw 70% of the opportunities. Now, the good news is with Jerick McKinnon gone, it's going to be really good news. In the 7 games without Jerick McKinnon last year, he averaged 21 touches per game, over 100 total yards, and 1.2 touchdowns over that stretch. Now, he went from 15 fantasy points per game to 20.6 fantasy points per game, which would have made him the RB3. So there's nothing else really behind him, right? It's CEH, which we know who that is. And then really we've seen generic Prince. And then Carson Seals actually been taking some carries with the 1 as well. It's not a lot of competition here for Isiah Pacheco. He's going to get all the work inside the goal line. He's going to get the 2-minute work. So Isiah Pacheco, I just think is such an easy value right now. And even at cost right now, kind of going the back half of the second, early part of the third. We want to attack players that are on great offenses, and this is obviously one of the best offenses in the league. And Isiah Pacheco, for me, I have him as my RB6 right now. I think he could easily finish as a top 5 running back this year. I think this is the year that he puts it all together. Stuff where we can't do a league-winning upside and not talk about Devon Achane, RB10, 24th overall. And I get it. There's definitely some red flags here. There's some issues. Yes, he's going to regress. We don't really have to talk about that. Obviously, he is going to regress. It's going to happen. He's not going to average 7.7 yards per touch again. He's probably not going to average 6.62 yards per carry again. But he can be a super explosive running back. He was first in explosive run rate last year, 3rd in juke rate. There's some room for growth because he was actually 25th in route participation last year. So I definitely think he can be more involved as a pass catcher. I don't think Raheem Mostert's necessarily going anywhere, but they also drafted Jaylen Wright, who is a super explosive athlete, 5'11", 210 pounds. He also has 95th percentile speed score, 96th percentile burst score at Jaylen Wright, but I think he's more of a threat to Raheem Mostert than he is to Devon Achane. I don't think Devon Achane is going to be a player who sees a massive opportunity share. It's never going to be him. But I do think he's going to probably see somewhere probably 12, 13 carries a game and probably 3 to 4 targets per game, which is if he can do that, that's going to put him at 15 touches per game. And it's going to be a big enough boost where I think he can withstand a lot of this than what he did last year. So 17.3 fantasy points per game last year. One of the most explosive, electric running backs in the league. There's also the scenario where maybe this is more of a 3-man committee and it's a little bit more frustrating on a week-to-week basis. So those are things you're going to have to weigh in when it comes to Devon Achane. Just understand that he can be an absolute grand slam this year, but then he could also be a double as well. So I want to put that out there. Let's move over to the last running back we have to talk about here. That's Kenneth Walker. I absolutely love Kenneth Walker. RB16, 44th overall. Dealt with a few injuries, kind of missed a few games here and there each of the last 2 seasons. But this new coaching staff here with Mike McDonald and Ryan Grubb has just absolutely raved all offseason, all training camp about Kenneth Walker and how much they love him. I think where he can improve is as a pass catcher. That is something that is going to be critical for him to be able to take this next step to be a top 10 running back. Last year, he was 38th in route participation, despite being 14th in yards per route run. Zach Charbonnet is still there. Zach Charbonnet, I think, was very underwhelming last year, kind of mid. Charbonnet did finish 11th in route participation, but he still only had a 7.6% target share last year. So I do think that he's going to be involved. But I think Kenneth Walker is probably going to hover right around where he was last year. 67, 70% of the opportunities. The big question mark is going to be is do they get him more involved in the passing game? If they do, then he can easily finish as a top 10 running back this year and easily outperform his RB16 ADP right now. So somebody that's been a tremendous runner just needs to kind of add that pass catching component. And he really does remind me of Josh Jacobs a few years ago whenever he finally put it all together and broke out in a big way. I think that could be Kenneth Walker this year. Let's move over to the wide receiver position here. Now, another player that we just kind of talked about is kind of being obvious. I'm going to say the same thing. But my wide receiver 1 this year is Jamar Chase. Wide receiver 5, 7th overall. Listed player last year, 9.1 targets with a 26% target share. Last season, he was 19th in market share of air yards, 26th in deep targets, but 8th in red zone targets. Averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game. He did that on 100 receptions, 1,200 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns. Now, we have to remember last year, Joe Burrow missed the second half of the season. And Joe Burrow really didn't ever look like Joe Burrow, let's be honest, right? But I will say in the 5 games where he got hurt, Jamar Chase averaged 24 fantasy points per game over those 5 games. So Jamar Chase 100% has that kind of range, and I feel like he's just kind of being not I don't want to say forgot about because obviously his ADP, but like he just doesn't get talked about in the same light this year as guys like CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill do in terms of being able to be the number one wide receiver. Jamar Chase definitely could be that. I mean, if you have to look at the wide receivers, I mean, T. Higgins really fell off last year. And then you had Joe Burrow with all the injuries. They lost Tyler Boyd, but they did bring in Jermaine Burton. They don't have a tight end. So he's easily going to be a player who's going to see 25, 30% target share. And I definitely think he has that range of outcomes in his bag that he could be the number one wide receiver this year. And for me, I think he's going to put it all together this year and finally have that breakout year. I think Joe Burrow bounces back. And so Jamar Chase for me is my number one wide receiver this year. Keep moving here, and I want to talk about another wide receiver that I talked about in a previous video, and it got a little bit of a hate, but people are starting to come around to it, and that's Malik Nabers, wide receiver 24th, 44th overall right now. Now, listen, since 2021, we've seen 7 wide receivers that have been selected in the top 15 of the NFL draft. 6 of those have posted top 36 season, and we've seen 2 of those actually finish as top wide receiver ones, and that was Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle. All I'm going to say is this. Is that, yes, I get it, Daniel Jones is his quarterback. I totally understand that. But I definitely think that he is good enough to be able to support Malik Nabers. I think Malik Nabers sees easily a 30% target share within this offense, a player that's going to see 150 targets this year, and is just an absolute baller. I think he's a stud. Daniel Jones certainly isn't just completely awful quarterback that we like to think of him as. I mean, this is a player that's had 0 weapons whatsoever in his career, like none. They tried to bring in Darren Waller. That was a flop. They tried to bring in Kenny Golladay. That was an absolute flop. He just hasn't had elite talent surrounding him. And one thing that I'll say that's good for Malik Nabers is he targeted his first read on 70% of his dropbacks and 66% of that going to wide receivers. So I think Malik Nabers is in line for a massive, massive target share this year. And I absolutely love him at wide receiver 24, 44th overall. That's why I have him ranked as wide receiver 12. Maybe hot. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if it pays off, but I absolutely love Malik Nabers. I'm betting on the talent here. Rashee Rice, wide receiver 36, 80th overall, another Kansas City Chief. Now, for a lot of the offseason, people were nervous about all the dumb stuff he did over the offseason, which was incredibly stupid what he did. But it doesn't look like he's going to get suspended this offseason. And we are now 2.5 weeks away from the season. They still don't really have a court date set. We don't really know what the hell's going on there. And we know the NFL is not going to suspend him until he gets all of that cleared. I don't think that's going to happen this offseason. Very much like the Alvin Kamara situation of a couple of years ago. I think this is something that's going to take until next year for this to get sorted out. And so with that being said, Rashee Rice is not going to get suspended this year. And so that makes him a tremendous value at wide receiver 36. Last season, from week 7 through 17, he was the wide receiver 13 in fantasy points per game with a 19% target share. He had 58 catches, 693 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns, averaging 15.8 fantasy points per game over that span. He was very efficient, 10th in yards per route run. He also was 7th in red zone targets. Now, they utilized him very, very, very similar to what they did with like Travis Kelce. They did have no deep threats whatsoever last year, and that was evident in the way they utilized them. They only had 5 deep targets last year. He was 85th in market share of air yards last year. They just did not use them that way. He was very much, a short intermediate route type of player, but he was tremendous with the ball in his hands, yards after the catch. He was also 3rd in target separation, so that was something that a lot of people were knocking him about heading into last year, that he wasn't a good separator, but he was actually 3rd in target separation. And so I just think this is going to be a player that's going to be their number one target earner at wide receiver this year. I know they drafted Xavier Worthy. Andy Reid typically slow plays rookies. It's kind of what he does. They also have Hollywood Brown, who's dealing with an injury. He could miss the first 2 weeks of the season. But Rashee Rice figures to be that. And I actually think these added weapons on the outside, players that are going to be able to open things up for him, is going to be even better for Rashee Rice. You also have Travis Kelce, who I do think is going to play on a reduced snap count this year. I think they're going to try to limit him a little bit, especially early in the season, so he's more healthy going into the playoffs like he was last year. So Rashee Rice is just a smash value. I have him moved up to my wide receiver 18 right now. He's currently going at wide receiver 36. But lastly, let's move over to the tight end position. And I have one guy to hit on is Dalton Kincaid, tight end 5, 51st overall. Again, I really want to do whatever I can to come away with probably like the top 6, top 7 tight ends. I'm going to do whatever I can to get one of these guys. I don't think you need to draft Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce for going in round 2. I think that's too rich. Go with Dalton Kincaid. Right now, something he has over all these guys is he looks like he's the number one target earner on this offense this year. There's 240 targets that are vacated with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis moving on. Last year, he had a 17% target share, 73 catches, 673 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. But he has the potential to lead this team in targets. Yes, Dawson Knox is still there. Dawson Knox is going to mix in. Dawson Knox is going to get some routes. But I think they're going to use Dalton Kincaid much more like a wide receiver this year. And so I really think he's going to lead this team in targets. One thing that we always liked about Travis Kelce was the fact that he was kind of their number one wide receiver. And I think Dalton Kincaid is kind of their version of that. I really think Dalton Kincaid has the tight end one upside this year. And so he is somebody that I am drafting aggressively at cost because I think he could easily be a league winning type tight end. So draft Dalton Kincaid wherever you can. So that being said, that's the list. Let me know in the comments section below. Here's players that you think can win some leagues this year. We'll see you on the next one.